Let's talk about one of my favorite lenses of all time, the Canon 24-105 f4R. This is for their new mirrorless RF system, which means there's only one camera you can put it on right now, the Canon EOS R. This lens is really important because the Canon EOS R is a consumer camera body, not a pro body, and most consumers want a general purpose lens, like the 24-105 f4. So if this lens sucks, the whole system kind of sucks. But if this lens is great, actually it could be pretty great. If you want to win a Canon EOS R, head to freesdp.com. And if you actually want to learn photography, something that will make a way bigger difference in your photos than all of this camera gear combined, head to northrop.photo. You can pick up the #1 photography book in the world, Stunning Digital Photography, as well as our video training series, The Art and Science of Photography. All of it is 20% off if you use the coupon code PIXEL. The purpose of this lens is anything. It's travel, it's a little bit of sports, it's some portraiture if you're at 105 and f4. It's kind of the lens that you can put on your camera and do anything with. It's a jack of all trades and a master of none. It's not as fast or as sharp as, say, the amazing 50mm f1.2 or 28-70 f2, the only other two lenses currently available for this camera. But if I were taking a trip, it is the lens that I would have on there. It's lighter weight, and it just generally works great in a wide variety of situations. The build quality is excellent. It feels just like the other Canon R lenses. It has 3 rings on it, obviously a zoom ring. It does telescope in and out. The front element does not rotate, however. It has a focusing ring for times when you don't want to manually focus, and it has a control ring, which you can configure to change settings on your camera. Of course, I have it set to change the aperture. I found this really convenient because my left hand is resting there anyway, and it lets my left hand quickly change a setting so I don't have to move my thumb on the body itself. Of course, it has a switch to turn off autofocus. There's also a locking switch over here, which just locks the zoom because as you walk, it could pull down like that, and it has enough tension that you don't need it, but maybe as the lens ages, you'll want that. And of course, it's a stabilized lens. You can turn that off, but you can pretty much leave it on all the time. It seems to shut itself off on tripods and such, and I never noticed any negative effects of the stabilization. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. I want to point out the rear element on this lens. You can see it goes pretty close to the back of the lens there, and that means that the optics are coming pretty close to the sensor, closer than they could possibly come on an SLR, which has that mirror built in there. Because these mirrorless bodies are thinner, they have a lower flange distance, optics can be designed closer to the sensor, meaning lens designers have more flexibility. They can produce higher quality lenses than they have in the past, and that's part of why we're going to see that the 24-105 just kicks the butt of the other Canon DSLR lenses that we compared it to. In my experience, the autofocus on it was just fine. It's a combination of the performance of the lens and the body, but together they worked pretty well. This camera doesn't have amazing autofocus, but for the types of things that I shot that with, it was fine, and that's general purpose photography. For example, we have some pictures here, you know, like regular vacation shots. I held it out at arm's length and it focused on our faces just fine. Taking pictures at Chelsea's grandmother's house, it focused on everybody just fine. And most photographers who use it for this sorts of general photography will say it focuses fine. The bokeh on it seems fine. There's nothing unusual about it. Let's look at some samples showing potential flaring. I took a bunch of pictures directly into the sun at different apertures. This is the kind of situations where you would see flaring. At f4.5, you can see a little bit of starburst here through the tree, but no real flaring. At f16, you can see some flares start to appear here. As I cranked it up, I saw more and more flaring. A little bit of visible flaring right here at f16, but pretty much wide open. There's nothing distracting. It's one of those situations where I did it just in case there was a problem, but I really didn't discover anything. You can see that kind of starburst effect here as we shoot into the sun. Also note, really good contrast for shooting right into the sun. With a lot of lenses, you would have seen all of this get washed out, but you can see we have pretty pure blacks here despite shooting in a really incredibly challenging scenario. Here's another couple of shots shooting directly into the sun at f4. No visible flaring, but once I get to f22, you can see we start to show some flaring here. The stabilization on it was fantastic to the point where I went out night photographing with a friend in LA and we didn't need a tripod. I just did everything handheld. We have a lot of night shots here, but for example, this is not an interesting shot, except that I shot it at 2 full seconds. And you can see zoomed in 1:1, it's really sharp. What I don't see is any camera shake there. And I can't promise that every shot you take at 2 seconds is going to be sharp, but I got a whole lot that were sharp at really slow shutter speeds. So that's the kind of thing that makes your life much easier. Like this shot here at half a second, handheld, and you can see everything turned out really sharp. So that means sometimes it can get dark and you don't need to carry a tripod, and that's really, really valuable. We have tested the Canon 24-105 DSLR lens, and the image stabilization was nowhere near this good. So they've really improved that, making it sort of the ultimate in versatility. Let's compare it against the Sigma 24-105 f4 EF Canon EF DSLR lens. Why not the Canon 24-105 f4? Because we never liked that lens. We tested it against the Sigma and we decided we were going to use the Sigma instead, so we don't happen to own it. The Sigma here is better than the Canon, so if you have the Canon and you're thinking about upgrading and getting that new kit lens, it'll give you some idea. I'll just say the new Canon RF lens is far, far better than you could expect to get out of your old DSLR lens. Let's zoom in at 3:1 to Turkey here, and you can see at 105 millimeters, the Canon RF lens is far sharper than the Sigma, and this Sigma in turn was far sharper than the Canon SLR lens. So you can imagine this new Canon RF lens is much better than the Canon DSLR lenses that you'll see, partly because it's newer, but partly also because of the flexibility of having that reduced flange distance. Beyond just the additional sharpness, let's zoom back out here. Watch the histogram here as I switch between the Sigma lens and the new RF lens. And what you'll see is the Sigma lens, the histogram is kind of spread out and wide. As we hit the R lens, everything gets much sharper. The lens itself is much more contrasty. That means the lens elements are not bouncing light all around inside. It has special magical coatings that keep the light heading on as straight a path as possible. That increases contrast, but also increases your perception of sharpness in the image. And that's part of why that lens ends up looking just so really, really great. I'm showing it at 105 millimeters. The differences were less at 24 millimeters, but nonetheless, they were still visible. What about the amazing Canon 24-70 f2.8L lens? This has kind of been our benchmark in the DSLR world. So let's see how it compares against that, a much less expensive stabilized lens. First, you can see the Pro L lens here has a little bit more contrast as you look at the histograms, but it's not much more. And as we zoom in at 3:1, the Canon L lens, the 24-70 f2.8, is just a hair sharper, but it's not that much different throughout the focal length all the way up to 70 millimeters. So much so that I wouldn't really mind using it at all. So how does it compare to my previous favorite kit lens, the Sony 24-105 f4G? That lens completely blew away the Nikon and Canon and Sigma equivalents. I compared them side by side, and they're actually really, really similar. Similar enough that it's not that interesting. There's a little bit of sharpness difference, but I attribute that mostly to the fact that if I compare the Canon EOS R to the Sony a7 III, well, the Canon EOS R has more megapixels. If I compare it to the Sony a7R III, now Sony wins again, but the camera body has more megapixels. In other words, both those lenses seem roughly equivalent, and I would be very happy with either one of them. If you want to see this lens used while vlogging, head to sdp.io/sdfail, where I recorded a whole video with it, and you'll see lots and lots of video shot with it. And if you want to get it, you can use this link right here. It's a lens I highly recommend with the EOS R. It's like the must-have lens. It's just a great walking around lens, probably better than any other lens we've tested for that purpose. If you want to win the Canon EOS R, head to freesdp.com. If you want to learn photography, go to northrop.photo and use the coupon code PIXEL for 20% off, or just look up Tony Northrop at Amazon. You can find all my books with lots of reviews there. Subscribe for the full review of the Canon EOS R, as well as the Fuji X-T3 and many other cameras and lenses, as well as tutorials that will teach you stuff that will matter a lot. Thanks a lot.